Hey, my name is Alex Crump. In today's video, I'm going to be advocating why the United States needs to continue utilizing affirmative action policies in employment and university admissions practices. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, affirmative action means positive steps taken to increase representation of women and minorities in areas of employment, education, and culture from which they've been historically excluded. So this means that employers and universities will consider race in their hiring or admissions practices to better promote diversity and integration of women and minorities. Affirmative action began in the 70s when President Lyndon Johnson passed the mandate number 11246, in which institutions needed to rework themselves so they would no longer be discriminating against women and minorities. And this was under the guise that our institutions are systemically exclusionary towards women and minorities, and so they needed to take serious measures to go the opposite direction. So this means that, and so the controversy was stirred when white students were feeling like they were being replaced by students with less credentials than they were, and so students were missing out on being admitted to schools because those spots were being filled up by black and brown students. The University of Michigan has in their university's mission is to have state leadership represent the state's population, and so and this has been adopted across the country, is where our institutions are historically exclusionary and historically dominated by white males, but our population is very diverse, but it's very segregated, it's not integrated, and so the purpose would be to get more women and minorities into colleges where they can then go forward in life as professionals and leaders, and go ideally help underserved communities, represent underserved communities, and just create a more integrated, holistic society that is not dominated by one group of people. One argument that people will make against affirmative action is that it creates reverse discrimination. So in 2014, this young girl, Abigail Fisher, sued the University of Texas because she felt that students with less credentials than her were granted admission while she was denied. And it ended up making it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that universities can still consider race in their admissions. And Abigail Fisher's case was an interesting one because she sued because she thought that students with less credentials than hers were getting admitted over her, but then according to the Washington Post, of the 47 students admitted over her, 5 were black, the other 42 were white, and there were 168 black and Latino students that with similar grades, equivalent or better grades than Abigail Fisher, who were also denied admission. And so she, of course, lost her case. And another part of her argument was that she had legacy status. Both of her parents attended University of Texas, and so she assumed that her legacy status would supplement for her GPA that wasn't quite as high as she would have hoped. And this leads to an interesting point, is that universities historically have been using like GPAs and test scores and AP test scores as the merits to get into university, as the most objective and the most useful criteria for college admissions. But research shows that historically, underfunded schools with predominantly people of color faculty and students remained underfunded and still do today. And these black and brown students didn't have the same resources that white students did. Like, they didn't have the ability to get tutors to practice to get practice AP exams, and several schools, black students couldn't even get access to AP scores in the first place, and so these institutions, these structures were inherently discriminatory against black students, and they still are today. So affirmative action helps to not so much promote a preference, a racial preference, but it's intended to remove obstacles that these long-standing obstacles that are still in place today. And back to the University of Michigan's mission to create a more diverse and integrated society. This, I think, works an example as to how affirmative action has worked, because the 116th Congress, the current Congress we have, is the most diverse Congress by far. It has, there are 57 black Congress members, which is a record, 131 women Congress members, which is also a record, and same with 4 Native Americans is a record, and 51 Latinx or Hispanic members, all records of diversity and integration in the House of Representatives and the Senate. However, if you add those up, that means only 25% of the entirety of Congress is non-white, and only 25% of it is women, whereas half the U.S. population is women, and it's almost 40% non-white. And so our Congress, while it's the most diverse in history, still is not representative and integrated enough to represent the whole entire holistic society. So we need affirmative action to continue, because while we've made a lot of progress with getting women and minorities into higher positions where they can have a greater influence, greater impact, there's still a long ways to go. We still don't have an integrated society. It's still very segregated. And so affirmative action policies are not meant to bring down white people, but they're supposed to empower these groups that have been marginalized for generations. So affirmative action is still very much necessary in the United States, because without it, our racist and sexist institutions would continue with their practices and maintain the status quo.